Okay. Um, so hello everyone. Um, my name is Jennifer. I'm the VP Student Life of the SFSS. Um, so the SFSS, we're basically the Undergraduate Student Society of SFU. We represent all undergraduate students. Something I really want to mention is that we have our annual general meeting coming up on Monday, October 26th. I made a playlist today to promote this annual general meeting. And please come because we're going to be voting on basically shaming SFU for raising tuition during the pandemic. But I made a cute little playlist. You should check it out. It's on the SFSS_events Instagram. And the songs are Please come to this annual general meeting. SFU Stop Raising Tuition. Monday, October 26th. Meet me on the mountain. JK, it's on Zoom. So I was so shook that I found a song called SFU. But yeah, be sure to check that out. Head over to our Instagram account, SFSS_events, or our main account, SFSS_SFU. Everything's on there. And I will hand it over to Sahil to do his intro.
Okay, hi, I'm Sahil. I'm one of the executives for the UPhoto Club, and I'm going to be hosting today's workshop about how to edit on Lightroom and Photoshop mostly. And then before we start, I want to ask how many people edit on their phone, or how many people edit using a computer or phone? Like, which one do you usually prefer using?
I think it depends on the situation for me. Sometimes I use Instagram filters, but sometimes I use Photoshop. So maybe people, can you just like put your answers in the chat?
Okay,
Maybe.
I'm going to, first I'm just going to I'm going to share you can do everything on your phone. Basically you can download Lightroom for free and you can download Photoshop as well. So this is are you able to see this?
Yeah, I can see that. That's so cool.
So you can this is Lightroom on your phone. So you basically can go and have your raw photos on your phone, I'm going to be using an iPhone. So you can grab a raw photo like this one, for example, and everything I'm going to be demonstrating on the Lightroom on my computer is basically quite similar to this one. And then there's little icons with a blue star on them. And those are the ones where you have to basically buy the subscription. So those are the features you're not going to be able to use. But everything else is like similar to it. You can do cropping on here. You can have your light settings. Oh, you can't even use RAW, I noticed. You can't edit RAW. You have to edit JPEG. If you want to edit RAW, you have to get the full subscription, but okay. And then, yeah, so if you have a JPEG image on here, you can just do everything on basically similar to on your phone. So yeah, I just wanted to show that. And you can also export. If I take this one, for example, I can go and open this. I can go to open in, and once it loads, you can open it into, you can grab Photoshop from here. So there's the Photoshop app is PS Express, and then you press on that one.
Wait,
and then it will swap over to there.
Is PS Express free on my phone?
Yeah. PS Express is also free, and it's basically a mobile equivalent to Photoshop. And then you have all the white balance, you have the HDR, you have the overlay, you have cropping. You can crop on here, and then you can adjust everything. And you can also do tone curves and everything on here too with a slider. So everything is doable on the phone mobilely. And then on the top, there's a little like special wand picture, a wand icon, and then that will basically auto enhance your picture. So if you want to do a really quick edit, you just press that, and then it auto enhances it to your liking. But I mean, not your liking, but it just auto enhances what the app thinks is best for your picture. Yeah, so I'm gonna switch over to my
Wait, can I ask if you prefer Lightroom or Photoshop?
I prefer Lightroom.
But why?
Can you see my Lightroom screen, my tab open?
It's a white screen for me. Yeah, big
How about this
white
one?
strip. Ooh, there you go.
Okay, I'm going to be, yeah, I think I prefer Lightroom. You can do everything on Photoshop, is very similar, but it's just kind of like a preference thing. You can also, once you're done editing, I'm going to switch over the image to Photoshop where you can right click and then you, same thing as on the phone, you go edit in Adobe Photoshop CC 2019. So this will, instead of exporting your picture, it's better to keep it within all the programs so you don't kind of lose quality by exporting and then taking that picture, then importing it again. It's better just to keep it into the processing phase and then you basically keep it in there and it can retain some quality without losing anything. So here is Lightroom. I'm basically going to go through Lightroom. So on the top, this is your histogram. And an important thing to know about the histogram is basically there's no, people think that there's a proper curve that you're supposed to follow. Like you're supposed to have everything evenly distributed as a hill, but that's not completely true. It actually, the histogram is just a way of showing what your picture is composed of, what shadows, what midtones, and what highlight quantities in your picture. So if you take a picture of a polar bear, for example, the shadows are only going to be on its nose and eyes because those are the only portions that are black. And then everything else is white. So your whole histogram is going to be skewed to the left side where the highlights are, or no, right side where the highlights are. And basically that's usually, it just represents what your picture is. But it's like a digital, there's also perfect black and perfect white. And that's basically areas where you can't recover if you go past that point. So I imported this kind of black, these bar chart here, and I wanted to show you how the histogram is distributed here. So it's all these peaks here in the corner, if you can see that. And this is what it represents of what is on the screen right now. And this is basically using, usually you want to edit on a raw file because it retains the most quality. And that's why usually on JPEG, if you take a picture of something and for some reason your exposure is too high or you somehow hit perfect black or perfect white, that data can't be saved anymore. It's basically, if you try to change it, it'll become gray. So that quality is gone. So then what RAW gives you is a much more kind of larger histogram. So you retain more data basically. And yeah, so that's the histogram. And now the next thing is these icons on the bottom here underneath your histogram. And this is your cropping. So usually if you're exporting a picture for Instagram, you want to do 4:5. This is basically the crop for Instagram. And if you're doing it vertically, you want to press X on your keyboard. That's going to switch it over to this. And this is going to be the largest file or crop size that you can export into Instagram. And then there's also other crop sizes. If you're doing your phone, for example, you can go really wide into like 1920 1080 is a phone screen size. So this would take up your whole phone screen for maybe a background if you want. And then you can also do custom sizes, which we're not going to worry about right now. And then you can also rotate the image. And then there's something here with, this is your white balance. This is what I was talking about in the last workshop, is you can set your white balance. And what white balance is your camera is trying to basically hit perfect, like it's trying to make sure your whites are white. And you can always, if you're in like a more, I don't know, if you have a lighting that's more yellowy or something and you wanted to change it to more bluer tones, you could always change it in here. So this is changing my tones into blue. And if I go to the right, this is going to change the temperature kind of into more yellowy. And then there's tint, which is the same thing. More to the right, you go magenta, and then the other side is more green. And now you have the exposure. You could do auto. This is the same thing on the phone. It kind of does everything for you, but usually this doesn't really do a good job. You want to do it more manually. So this is your exposure and contrast. What contrast basically does is it raises highlights and darkens your shadows. And then we have highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. So this is basically what it says. These are going to make your shadows darker. This is going to make your shadows more brighter. And the same thing for the whites and blacks. And then the tone curve is basically, it's similar to these sliders, but the tone curve is more used for detailing. So if I want to make an image brighter, sometimes you get a funky looking tone curve if you try to do everything on there. I can show it later on when we have a proper image, but this is what I want to show you how the tone curve works. So you have this point right here is going to be your highlights. So the top of this curve, and the center is going to be your midtones. And then at the bottom here are going to be your shadows. So usually what people do is they place these 3 points here, and this is easy to kind of manipulate your brightness of the shadows here. So if I look at this middle point, it's going to say, if you look at the top corner, I don't know if you can see that, but it says 56, or I mean, it says 50.6 divided by 50.2%. I don't know if that's visible or not, but that's basically showing you that the 50% kind of shadow, like in the middle area where it's gray, that's 50% gray. And then if I go down to the bottom here, it's going to be 23% gray, which is the darker side. And if I go to the more lighter side, it's 100% or 78%. So if I raise this higher, it's taking my 52% grays and it's making them as high as you go. It's going to make it like 70, depending on how high you want it. It's going to make it your 51% grays into 80% grays. And then if I go at the bottom, it's going to do the same thing. So if it's going to do the opposite thing I meant. So if I place these 3 things here, usually the most common tone curve when editing a picture is the S curve, where you basically have your shadows darker and your highlights higher like this. And this is the basic tone curve everyone follows. And most beginners, usually this is the best type of curve you can do. You can also do double S curves, and there's other complicated things you can do on there. But if I take my absolute blackest, you can see if I take my absolute blackest percentage of gray, it's basically black, but I could make it gray if I bring it up. Now that gray is exactly the same color as the bar right next to it. And if I do the same thing with the whites, this is my white on the right side. I can take the whites and then I can bring the whites down and make the whites the exact same color as the white bar next to the whites. And then that's basically your highlights, your midtones in the middle are all the same still color, and then the dark shadows. And then yeah, that's basically the tone curve. Then there's also this eyedropper tool. So if you're editing a picture of a portrait of some subject, of a person, you're doing a portrait shot, you want to put this on their skin where it's highlighted. So like their highlights and shadows, you want to place 2 markers. So if I put my marker here, it's going to give me a point on the tone curve in the whites. And if I put another marker down to the blacks, it's going to give me a point where the blacks are in the shadows. So this is not going to change depending if I change my tone curve in other areas. Those 2 points are not going to change. They're going to stay that color. So that's good if you want to keep the tones or the shadows and midtones and everything similar color of what the actual person's skin color is. So that's more used for portrait shots of people.
Okay, some people have questions in the chat. Someone is asking what happens if you make a double S, and then someone else asked, Sahil, Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah, do you have a test photo to
Okay,
show us, Steven?
finally.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, wait.
I just
Yeah,
wanted to
test photo.
basically show how the tone curve worked, and I was just using this as an example to basically get down. There's no tone curve there's no like one fits all tone curve. You always have to make changes, and then that's why presets. There's always a preset you can click on that does the job for you, but you always wanted to do little changes here and there because no preset's going to be good for every single shot you take. Okay, I'm gonna grab another picture. So this is how you can still see this, right? This is how you can import you can just slide and drop into Lightroom. And then sometimes it does a thing where it doesn't take in duplicates. I'll have to fix that later, but right now I'll just make a copy of this. Okay, I'm going to use this one. So if you want to zoom into your image, you can go to the top where it says navigator, and you can click and zoom in, and you can do some fine adjustments there and look at things like, I don't know, if you want to do some detailing work or zoom into the image, you can do that over there in the corner. So here, also I wanted to add in about the tone curve. Everything I explained about the tone curve is exactly the same with your red, green, and blue channel. And thus, this is basically changing it's basically changing the color in the image. So if I bring my reds up, it's gonna make the image more red. And if I go down, it's gonna do the opposite of red, which is cyan. So this is gonna make my image more cyan-y color. And if I want to reset my tone curve, you just right click and press flatten curve. So this is going to reset my tone curve. So this image, wait, I should also disable flux. So now this image here, if I wanted to make it
Wait, hold
more
on.
blue.
What is flux?
Oh, flux is just it's basically a program I have that makes my screen yellow. So when you're editing an image,
I have
when you're
that
editing
too.
an image, I like turn it off because it changes the color of the screen. So I want to make sure that's off before editing. So here I'm gonna make, so if you look at the tone curve if you look at the histogram at the top, as you make adjustments, it's gonna move at the top. So if I hit perfect white, everything's gonna go to the right side, and this is like blown out. But if I go to the other side, it's gonna make everything dark. So you wanna find you have to play around with exposure. Usually you wanna add this picture, make it more contrasty, and then highlights. One thing, so you can see the clouds here are all highlighted. So if I bring my highlights down, it's going to make the clouds more visible. Exposure and brightness. They're basically the same thing. Like the exposure is just how bright an image is. And there's only this slider right here, which is exposure. That's just going to make the image brighter. There's no brightness type of exposure and brightness are basically the same thing. And then shadows is your shadows on the bottom here. So there's a shadows on the bottom. You can make it so it's not too dark. So if I want to make more fine adjustments, so then I can go to my tone curve and you place 3 points, one in midtones, one in highlights, and one in shadows.
Regarding the exposure, if it helps people, you could think of exposure like if you would change the exposure settings on the camera when you initially took the picture. And that in turn will affect the brightness of the picture because it's how much light was being let in or not.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, exposure is basically, it's similar to, yeah, it's brightness. And it's basically the same as your exposure on your camera. This is something where if you can always change exposure if you make a mistake. When you're taking a picture, you can always change exposure later. You can always change your temperature, which is your like white balance also. Everything can be changed in post. So, and then there's clarity. You can make the image more clear. And this adds more clarity to your image. So here I want to basically bring my shadows down to make it more contrasty. And I'll bring my highlights up. But then I don't like how blue it is. So I'm going to bring my white balance down a bit. And then also the tint. If you want to make it more, I don't want to make it too magenta-y, so you could go down to maybe small changes make a big difference, like -3. You won't see the difference too much, but if you zoom in, you can really see that. And then whites, you can see that it changes all the whites in the image. And then down here, this is basically your color channels. And this is going to change the color of like the individual colors in your image. So if you see the mountains here are all kind of blue color. So if I go down to the blue and aqua, you can make the color of the mountains different. So if I wanted to make it more cyan, you can bring them closer to the left, and then same thing as the right. But usually you want to keep it to a realistic point. You don't want to go over the top and make it look too fake. And then saturation is how much saturation you're putting into the, like how much color is going to pop in the image. And then luminance, this is basically brightness, how bright you're going to make that color. And then if there's no colors like purple and magenta, there's nothing in there. So this is not going to make any difference if I change purple and magenta, because there is none. And then greens, you can also make the trees more green, but they're kind of too dark in this image. And then yellows and oranges, there's not really much in here. And then split toning, this is basically going to, you can pick so when we were talking about highlights in the image, I can pick my highlights to be a different color. So if I wanted my highlights to be more yellow, you can pick, using this color picker tool, you can pick the yellow one, and then saturation is how much it's going to be put into the image. So if I just want a really small amount, maybe like 12, and then the same thing with this split toning is going to be shadows. So if I want to make the shadows of my image look more green, I can place it right here and then just enhance it to maybe 6. And then this is also sharpening in your image. This is how sharp it's going to be. You don't want to overdo it. Usually I like to keep that on 0. How could you do so much on Lightroom? You can do all this on Photoshop too, but Lightroom is usually, people do it on Lightroom first, and then they bring it over to Photoshop to do other things that I can show later. And then this is going to be your lens correction. So if you're taking a picture with a, let's say, for example, you're taking a picture using a GoPro. GoPro has a really wide field of, it has a really wide, like 14mm, I think it is, like focal length. So you would want to basically change, there's different profiles you can get into here, and it will change like it will get rid of that fisheye look. But we don't have to worry about that. And then you want to also level your image. So you press level right here, and then this image is already leveled, but if you have a crooked image, this would auto level to make the horizon straight. And then if I go to the bottom here, this is called post-crop vignetting. So vignetting is basically the outside like ring around. It's like the, if you look at the borders of the image, if I add more to it, it's going to make the outside more white. And if I go the other way, it's going to make it darker. positive amount is white and negative amount is black. Yeah, thanks, Steven. And then usually when you're taking, it depends on, sometimes the reason why you want to make it white is there's some lenses that if you make the aperture too large, there's some vignetting that appears into some more like vintage cameras usually that has this vignetting, it has this kind of white look to it. I mean black outside from the vintage lenses. So what people do is they add this white amount to get rid of it. Usually you don't want to have, it depends. So usually people don't like having vignetting for nature shots. It doesn't look very good. So I'm just going to leave that to 0. It's okay to add a little bit of vignetting.
Something that's used for vignetting is portraits quite often, because
Yeah.
it brings the subject into the main focal point of the frame, because you don't tend to look at the black.
Yeah, so you get like more better, like you get focused more to the subject of the image. And then talking about vignetting, there's, if you go back to where the crop tool was, you can have your brush size or your like brushes. And this is, you can do clone and healing, which basically gets rid of like spots. This is usually better done in Lightroom. I mean, better done in Photoshop because it has a better way of clone stamping, and it has a better result if you do it in Photoshop. But if I'll just show you how to do it in Lightroom. So if you click on this image here, there's a circle with the arrow on it. There was some dust on my camera when I took this shot. So if I go, if I scroll down in this image, you can see this circle, this black dot here, which is dust on my sensor. So what you can do is you can grab this clone stamp tool and then just click on that circle, and then it will basically find another point that's similar to that one. And then you press enter, and then that black dot is gone. So you can do that to go through your image, find little detailings that you don't want inside, and you can kind of get rid of it. Photoshop does a better job of doing it. I'll show you later. And then you can also have, there's also red eye correction we don't have to worry about. There's also dodge and burn. You can also do this in Photoshop, but if you wanted to, you can do it in Lightroom. It's basically you have this brush and you can use your scroll wheel to make it smaller or bigger. So if I wanted to make these trees here brighter, you kind of go over the brush with this, and then I can brush over all the trees. It'll make it more bright, but that's obviously too much. So I'm gonna make it a minimal amount of exposure brightness here. And then you can also add more contrast to it and down, and then decrease the highlights. But this is something you can do. Dodge and burn is used when you want to make, different parts of the image darker or brighter. And you can also do the sharpness and everything else, like clarity, saturation, everything's here. So you can go through that. Then there's also this one. This is also if you want to have the skies look better. This would be better using this, what is this called again? But you could use this, basically this.
Gradient filter?
Yeah, gradient filter, thanks. The gradient filter basically is a better way. Instead of doing the down here in highlights, you can basically remove highlights, but when there's a line, a harsh line, it makes a really bad, like a harsh line between two different items. Like if I decrease the highlights all the way to 0, it's going to make a big line between where the fog is and where the clouds are. It's going to make a harsh line. So you can make this gradient filter have a gradual change, which looks much nicer. So if I wanted to make the sky more gray, I can bring down the exposure, and then it will make the, it won't have like such a harsh line where the mountains are. So that's basically most of the basics of Lightroom. And then if I grab this image here and I right click it, then I'm going to go over to edit in Adobe Photoshop. And then that's going to basically boot up render using Lightroom. And that's going to boot up Photoshop and bring your image. All the edits that you've done on here are basically going to go over to Photoshop. And it's a way where you can also, if you wanted to make changes in Photoshop, since it's both Adobe, you could always make changes on Photoshop and then also go back to Lightroom again and then start changing colors and things on there. So you can go back and forth. And now I'm going to show you how to use Photoshop. They're both like pretty similar, but everything we've done is similar to on here. Everything on Photoshop is done with layering. So you have a background layer and then you can add foreground layers and other things on top and grab things from the internet and put things on top of each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a new document. So I'm going to grab this picture of the mountains. And since this is raw, it's going to automatically open this, which is basically the same as Lightroom. Everything looks similar. Sorry?
We can only see Lightroom.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I didn't notice. Okay, now you can see Photoshop. So you can't see this image here, but it basically opens up Camera Raw, which is like another plugin that basically does everything similar to what Photoshop is. Everything that was there is basically the same. Then you can do open as copy. So now I'm going to have two of them here, this image and this image. So if I wanted to basically, we could put these two images together if you want. So if I wanted to change the mountains here, I can basically drag, you have to pick the background and then drag the background down to new layer. So this is going to make a background copy. And then in Photoshop, you do everything with layers. Everything is going to be kind of on top of each other. So you want to keep making new layers because if you mess something up in a section, if you're adding in something, you could always go back to that layer and adjust it. Because if you do everything on background layer, if you do all your editing and everything on one layer, that's going to cause problems with the trying to undo and trying to save what you've done before going back. So after you drag it to a new background layer, you want to select the background copy. And then you want to go over to, you can't see the top bar, right? Where it says file, edit. If you go to, okay, so for those of you that have Photoshop open, there's a bar at the top that basically you want to go over you want to go to select, then you're going to go over to select and mask. So this is going to make your image this is basically how you mask an image. So you can change the view of what you want, onion skinning, there's different ones. This is kind of a preference thing where you can choose what type of overlay you want. Usually the red one's the best because you can see clearly what you're doing. So if I want to brush over the things that I want to keep. So I want to keep this area here with all the the clouds, and then I want to keep this rock here. So it does a pretty good job of masking out the sky with the mountains. And then now I have this overlay here. And if you want to do more fine adjustments, you can see there's brushes in the top left corner. And it says quick select tool, that's the one we just used. Then you can go over to refine edge brush. And if you press command, if you're on Mac, you can press command plus and command minus, which zooms in and zooms out. If you're on PC, you can do control plus and control minus. So if you go and zoom in here, you can see some of the clouds have been clipped off. So when I'm using the fine edge tool, it kind of goes over and you can fix those little tiny things.
Wait, is
Usually-
this called painting as mask?
Is this called painting as mask? This is like, yeah, you're basically mask painting. Like it's called masking. So you're using your brush to mask out things. So once you have this done, and now you're going to, you have to make sure that if you go to the right side, you want to make sure your output settings here are output to layer mask. Then if you have it as that, then everything should be fine. Then you should press OK at the bottom. So now you're gonna have your background copy. And then this is going to be, once you have that done, you wanna go over to the tab where you have your other image. So I'm gonna have, so this is already masked out, the mountains here. So I'm gonna go here and then I'm gonna go, since I'm on Mac, I'm gonna press Command A, which selects everything. And then I'm gonna press Command C, which copies this image. Then I'm gonna go over back to the other image and I'm gonna press Command V to paste it. Then this is gonna paste my other image on top of here. And after I've done that, you're gonna drag down the layer that I just pasted and I'm gonna put it in between both. Now I have the mountains that I used in the other picture into here. And now I'm gonna drag it up a bit, maybe down, place it maybe like around here, looks okay. So now basically this is the main portion done, but this obviously doesn't look too good. You can make this look better. It depends how much time you want to spend on an image. You can always go through, try to make things better, add things and remove things. And before I continue doing that, I also want to show you, if you go over to edit, which is on the top menu screen, which you can't see, there's something called content aware fill. And what that does is basically the same thing what we did in Lightroom, where it does like clone stamping type of thing, but it does a much better job of it. But we don't really need to do that right now because there's nothing. I'm gonna go press on. But content aware fill basically does the same thing as what we did. It just does a better job. You select what you wanna do there. So after I have this image, I'm going to now, with the middle layer selected, I'm gonna go over and press on where the properties are. And then here you can change like the opacity. So this basically changes if you wanna, depending what you're doing in Photoshop, if you wanna make the layers kind of transparent with each other, you can change the opacity of the layer and you can do a lot of other things here. But I think I'm just gonna leave it to 100. And now with the layer selected, I'm also going to, since it's really sharp, I'm gonna pick on the layer 1 and I'm gonna go over to edit. And then I'm gonna go over, or no, sorry, not edit. I'm gonna go over to filter. Then you're gonna go to blur gallery and then you're gonna go and press on field blur. So what this does is gives you the most realistic blur onto Photoshop. So you wanna make this really minimal. You wanna maybe make it like 2 to 4 pixels, depending on how much you wanna blur it. So if I go to 100 or 400 pixels, it's gonna make it like this. Just, you're not gonna see the image anymore. It's all gonna be blurred out. But I can go down over to maybe 3-4 pixels. And then you can also change the bokeh or bokeh, or however you want to say it. You can change the bokeh of the motion blur also. So once this is done, you're gonna go and press OK at the top where it says save mask channel on the top here. You're not gonna press any of these, you're just gonna press OK. So this is gonna make the background a little bit more blurry and a little bit more realistic looking. And then to make the edges more smooth, you're gonna make the background copy. You're gonna command click on the background copy. And then with it selected, you're gonna click on the little square where we did the masking. Then once we have that selected, we're gonna make the feathering a little bit larger. Then after we have that done, you're gonna go and press Command D, which deselects everything. And now you can also add in more items. So if you wanted to basically grab some, so I'm gonna go grab some smoke or some fog. So I'm gonna grab this. This is, you can just go on the internet or wherever you want, find an image of fog or clouds or whatever you want to add. Then I'm gonna scale this up to around, I want to cover the bottom of it with fog. And then once this is at a good size, I'm gonna press enter. Then with this new image selected, I'm gonna go over to where it says normal. So you're gonna go over and you're gonna change it to soft light. Or you could also, it depends what the image you're doing. I think soft light would work. Then once you have that done, then you can also change like the, let me see here. You can change it to lighter. I think lighter works better. So now you have the, this is what the fog looks like on top of here, but I think I would want to make the opacity lower. So using that image that you imported in, you can click on the layer and then make the opacity less. Make it around 70%. So now you have a more like, yeah, fog on the bottom. So you can do this with anything. If you wanted to add an airplane or whatever you wanted to do, you can just add it in here. And if you can't, sometimes if you import an image, you have no option of scaling it. So you would go to edit and then you would have to go to transform, and then it'll enable you of doing that. And then also, if you don't like the way the fog looks, you could always change it by going to the adjustments. You can go to image at the top and adjustments. Image adjustments, and then everything that we talked about in Lightroom would show up. So it's at the top left corner where your main bar is. It says image adjustments, and then you can change brightness, your curves, your exposure, everything that we went through before. So I'm going to bring up the curves tab. You can't see the curves, but it's the same thing as what we did before. So I'm going to place the 3 dots onto my image. So this is only changing, it's only changing the fog. It's not changing anything else in the image. So if I want to make the fog more, I want to make it a little bit more darker, I can bring the shadows down so it looks more defined. Like the edges become a little bit more defined, but if I want to make it softer, I can bring the shadows up. And if I bring the shadows up, this will make the fog look a little bit more hazy. But if I bring the shadows down, this will concentrate the fog more. So you can change that and make the highlights a little bit larger. And then you can press OK. Then you can do the same thing of adding another image in. You can add some more fog. So here's another image of some fog that I want to put into my shot. So you're going to go over and transform it into a size that looks reasonable. And then also you would want to make it try to find high quality images. But it doesn't matter too much for this fog because it's going to be very subtle. So then I have the fog at a good size. I'm going to press enter. Then with that new fog selected, I'm going to go over back to lightened, or which one did I use again? Soft light, lightened. And then I'm going to, so I don't want, wait, which one did I use? Soft light. Nope. So I'm going to use screen for this one. So now if I want to get rid of some of this fog on this image, I can go over to the erase tool. So on the left side, you have all these tools you could use. And it has a clone stamp tool, which was the same thing as what we did in Lightroom. You basically can use clone stamping. So I'm going to go over to the erase tool. And when you're using the brush, I recommend using soft round because you don't want harsh edges. And then I'm going to make the size kind of, I'm going to make the size around maybe 1,700. So I can erase some of the fog if I want to make the mountains look more sharp. I can keep some of the fog, which is at the left-hand side here, covering these mountains. But if I want to sharpen these ones, you can go over with the brush tool and then make these mountains more sharp. And then if I want to get rid of some at the top here, you can do slight adjustments like this. And then I'm done with the erasing. And then you have this shot. So yeah, that's basically most of what you can do with like the layering and masking. So I'm going to go and click on my background. I'm going to go over to edit. Wait, I'm going to go over to this image. So this is basically content aware fill. I'm going to press Command D to deselect. So if you can see at the top, there's some lines where the clouds are. So this is basically what I was talking about before, is make sure that your background is selected. Then I'm going to go over to edit. Actually, you do want to select Command A, but you want to select everything on Mac and then Control A on PC. Then with it highlighted, you're going to go over to content aware fill. Let me bring in a better image. So I'm going to open this one. And then I'm going to go click on Control A. Then I'm going to go to Edit. And then I'm going to go to Content Aware Fill. Okay, wait. So sometimes I have problems with Lightroom as well.
Wait, where was this picture taken?
This one was taken at, do you know where the Seymour Valley Trail is, where the bike is, where the dam is?
I literally don't go outside.
Seymour Mountain, there's like a dam there with the reservoir water. And then there's a trail that you can go biking, and then there's a bridge here. Then I took a shot with this. Yeah, I used my drone. It was the Mavic Mini. I had it, we were biking, and then I just had a small drone in there because it's easy to take out and it's very lightweight. Okay, I'm just gonna quickly reopen Photoshop. I just want to show the content aware fill thing. Okay, I'm not sure why it's not working. Let me try something else. Oh yeah, I also want to share this. So when we were going back to Lightroom, this is basically what you want to follow when you're doing the red, green, blue channel. So this is since I'm using Lightroom 5, it's an older version of Lightroom. It doesn't actually have the color on it. The newer version does, but I don't have the current version. But when you go over to Lightroom and if you have the newer version of it, you can go to red, green, blue channels and you can change it and it shows you what you're actually doing. Like it shows you what color. So it's not something you have to memorize. So with the blue, if you go up, you can go bluer, and if you go lower, then you go yellow. So this is something that's in the newer version of Lightroom. I think, yeah, that's the most of it. Most of what I wanted to do. Is there any other like questions or something we can go through?
Do you have like any shortcuts? Or like easier
Shortcuts?
way to do things?
Okay, wait, let me just, there's one thing. What do you mean by easy way? Oh yeah, okay, wait, let me just open Lightroom again. So if you go back to this one, I don't know if you can see this or not, but if you're editing on more than one image, so if you have similar images, like you have this mountain shot and say you have a similar exact same location mountain shot, you can right click on this, or no, you can just go and press on copy. Then you can pick on the things that you want to copy over to that other image. So you have lens correction, you have split toning. If I want to copy all these things, you can check mark the things you want and you can uncheck the things you don't want. Then you can press copy and then go over to the other image, and then you can just press paste, and then it applies those edits that you put on the first image and it applies it to the second one. And that's a way of working faster if you're doing weddings or if you have like a whole bunch of similar images. You can basically just copy paste what you've done. And then another shortcut of something I do is, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but if you press L on your keyboard, it darkens everything except your image. So if I press L once, it makes everything dim. And if I press L twice, it completely blackens your image, but I mean your like desktop, but it keeps your image the only thing centered that's like highlighted. Everything else gets dark, like your desktop and whatever else, all the controls that you have on the right and left, it all disappears and you just press L.
That is so cool.
So yeah, I think that's the most of it. It's the most of what I wanted to show today.
Here's the heel. Did you show the white balance picker?
The white balance picker? No, I didn't show that. You can, yeah, I don't really use this, to be honest. Do you use it?
All the time. That and auto everything. Don't be afraid to auto things to learn what Lightroom wants you to do.
Yeah.
It's a great way to learn what it thinks is great. So
For some
I use
reason, I use it in Premiere Pro, but I didn't know it was a thing in Lightroom.
The
let's see.
auto?
You can't see anything. There we go.
Yeah.
Also,
Okay.
underneath the tone curve, there is a point curve drop down. You can pick between harsh, medium, and strong contrast straight from there.
Yeah, this is something that you can just quickly do.
So is it like a preset for the curve?
Kind of, yeah.
Kind of, yeah.
You can also double click on any of the points to immediately delete them.
And then you can also click on this this little icon here that has a curve. You can change highlights and everything with slider. The lights, darks, and shadows are all can be done using the, if you want to change the tone curve using the sliders, you can do this by clicking on this little kind of curve icon. And then let's say that you have an edit that you like, that you want to apply to your other photos. You're going to go over here that says presets, and there's a little plus icon. You're going to press on that, and then you can name the preset whatever you want. And then you'll have it in the right side, all these presets here that are going to be saved that you can use next time for your other photos. And you can name them what you want and have, use them for future shots.
Okay,
And also
wait.
you can collapse any of the options on the right hand side. If it's too confusing for you, you can just hit the arrow. And
you can hit the little arrows and they get rid of stuff.
Okay, you went over like highlights and shadows, but I noticed like near the top there's highlights, shadows, but then you also had it by the tone curve. Are those the same?
It depends what, yeah, these are basically the same thing, but you basically, sometimes if your shot is, you're gonna have, it's kind of hard to do everything on the tone curve because your tone curve can look really weird and you're gonna have no more precision and it's gonna be really hard to change the tone curve to what you want. If you have the sliders, you can do the basic changes with the sliders, and then the tone curve is something to use for like adjustments. So you can use, they both do the same thing, but you use them together to kind of have more detailing in your shot and have better control.
Okay. There's a question in the chat. Somebody is asking, I have spent some time editing photos and the colors often come out a bit too warm, too cold, or a bit off. Do you have any tips to create the perfect color balance, or do the skills just come with practice?
You could also white balance right here. There's an auto option. This is, you can just have Lightroom do it for you but it depends what you're looking for. Like this auto is not to my liking. And then you can also change like the white balance to as it was shot. So usually if you want it to be exactly how you wanted it to be, like you wanted the shot, like when you took the picture, you want the white balance as shot, you can just change it to as shot. And then depending on if you want it more white, or I mean, if you want it more blue or more yellow, you can just change this single. It kind of comes with practice. It kind of also gets hard sometimes of what you want to do because it doesn't, it's kind of hard to do. The hardest thing I think for me is messing around with the the red, green, blue channels on the tone curve, because sometimes I don't know what's happening sometimes, and it gets hard to get the colors you want. So it kind of comes with practice. Yeah.
Another thing is you get photo blind when you look at the same photo for a long time.
Yeah.
You can start seeing things, and you need to take like sometimes a day off and then come back to it later, and then you'll see if you made a color mistake or something, and then you can correct it later.
Yeah, that's the same thing with if you're reading like a peer-reviewed article and you have to basically go and write notes or write an essay on it, and you read it so many times, you kind of you're blindly going over it and you're maybe missing something. So you have to just take a break and put it to the side and kind of refresh your mind, and then come back, and then you'll notice those details that you missed later. So yeah, is there like any other questions or something else we can do? Or is that about it?
Well, just a comment in the chat. The tone curve often comes out really weird for me. But it's just
yeah, the tone curve is like, for me, it's one of the hardest things to kind of understand. I still don't really understand how those, the red, green, blue channels kind of gets complicated. It's usually subtle changes. You don't want to mess around with it too much.
I just throw it on medium contrast for the most part. Anything more than that, and it starts becoming too weird.
Yeah.
Alright.
For the curves, usually those are really good tips. I would say, like, if you want to make adjustment on those curves, make little ones. Like, don't drag too much. If you just drag a little bit just to feel for it, right? Usually that's enough. Yeah, that's how I see it anyway.
Yeah, it's a good way of looking at it.
Also, there are 4 different sliders at the top, or there are 6. There's exposure and contrast, and then highlight, shadows, blacks and whites. Highlights are like how bright you want your whites, but whites are like how much whites you want. It's a very confusing concept.
Yeah, those two kind of get mixed up sometimes.
But they have their differences.
And there's obviously like a lot more with Lightroom and also Photoshop. There's a lot more you can get into, but it kind of gets really complicated, and I don't even understand everything, how to do it exactly.
Same.
Like, there's so much you could do. Same thing with like Premiere Pro. It's overwhelming at first. There's so many things, but you kind of tackle it one by one.
There's one other thing I wanted to talk about. If you have like a folder of images, like all your photos in one folder, you can add that one folder to Photoshop, to Lightroom, and then you can synchronize that folder such that it keeps adding all the photos underneath it.
What do you mean by adds all the photos underneath it?
If you want to, I'll share my screen. I'll show you guys. So, let me just, does it want to? Of course, whatever. We're just going to share the screen.
That's another thing with
So
oh, wow,
if I go over,
who's that?
Yeah, no, right? If I go over to my folders right over here, I have my photography folder. I can just hit synchronize folder, and then it would just import everything underneath it. This is my folder. So I just added that one folder to Lightroom's library, and then it adds everything else underneath it.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
No, I never knew that. Never used that.
I haven't used Lightroom for a while. I'm using Affinity Photo a lot, but it has some similarities. Most of the stuff it matches.
Wait, is Affinity free?
No, it's a one-time purchase, and it's not subscription. So
Capture One is though, and that's what Sahil uses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That one's a pretty good software too. And then
yeah, if you wanted to use you can use Davinci Resolve. Is really good for video.
Davinci?
Davinci.
I was about to say Davinci, yeah, Davinci. was about to say like Davinci for fucking photo. What?
No, not for photo. But that's kind of, it's a little bit similar with what you're doing with the changes of colors and things, but there's obviously a lot of differences too.
If you guys can use a student discount for Adobe, that's the preferred. Just because Adobe has those mobile applications that nobody else has. And your Adobe subscription transfers over. So
Are there any other resources that you would recommend just for like people getting into photography and want to learn more?
You can join a
Like
lot of
general
like
questions and
Facebook groups. There's
Like
a lot of
ours?
Facebook groups.
which ones?
There's like, if you just search up, well, like if you're looking to learn more, or you can, there's also Facebook groups where you basically, or on Reddit, you get your photos critiqued by someone. You post it in there, and then they basically critique your photo, and there's a whole bunch of people there. So that's a kind of a way of getting more suggestions of how to change up your edits and things.
there are lots
Thank
of
you, Jennifer,
YouTubers.
There's a lot of stuff on YouTube, yeah, to watch.
HDR photos.
Isn't it HDR mostly? Isn't it
multiple
more
photos.
like lighting? I wouldn't say it's.
It's like high dynamic range.
Yeah, so it's,
Yeah.
what it consists of for DSLRs and stuff is multiple photos that are taken at that are taken right after each other, and then in Lightroom you can combine them together.
Oh yeah, another thing you can do is if you take a picture of the moon, for example, you can take like a whole bunch of pictures, like I don't know, 40, 50 pictures, and you kind of just compile them all together, and it'll make the moon look way more sharp than just having one shot.
That's HDR.
Yeah.
Yeah, precisely.
I think it can be easily confused with high definition resolution or something like that.
It's whenever you're taking those kind of shots, you got to make sure that your focus point doesn't change. Otherwise,
Kinda
it
hard.
will. Yeah, it will.
If
do
you're
that kind of
moving
thing.
around with like
Even
not
if
on a
you're-
tripod.
Even if you're on a tripod, because of
Yeah,
how
even if you're on a tripod.
I suggest going with manual focus, and then adjusting your focus to be exactly where you want it to be, locking in your exposure, and then just taking the shots right after each other.
Yeah. I think recently I've done some of those as well. Yeah. So I think it really depends on the camera. I don't think all cameras have brackets, right?
It doesn't. You don't need a bracketing mode to do it. You just do it yourself, and you just like adjust it so that it's once. You tend to go from like negative one stop to properly exposed to over one stop, like taking 5 or 6 shots in between, and then you can combine them in Lightroom.
It's like a bracket. Just think of like a bucket of settings, and then the camera just snaps continuously.
Bracketing. So here's the Wikipedia article for bracketing.
My laptop's gonna die.
It's like taking several shots together. Sometimes it's focus bracketing. I'm betting he also has some experience with focus bracketing.
Do I have? I haven't used it that much.
But you know what it is.
Yeah, I know what it is, but I don't really use it.
So you take a far away shot, and then you take one closer, 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 and then you combine them all in Lightroom, so you get the entire shot in focus. And so you don't need to run like F22 or something.
Are there any terms that anyone don't get, like any jargons that anyone's confused about? Just let us know.
Bracketing.
Yeah, so thank you. That was.
Wait, okay, before everyone goes, does UPhoto, I know in the summer you did like some photo contests. Does
Yes.
UPhoto have any photography things coming up soon?
Yeah,
We got Film Noir.
That's one, yeah.
This is our upcoming photography
This looks
contest,
cool.
and it's basically like black and white pictures. So yeah, just you can go to our Facebook or Discord or anything, Instagram, and you can get all the instructions exactly how to enter. And right here, it explains the instructions here too. You can just post it on Facebook, Instagram, or email it and use the hashtag UPhoto challenge and Film Noir. Then you have the chance to win a $25 Amazon gift card. And then I also want to add that this graphic and these shots are made by Daniel Shi. So he's one of our new graphic designers.
Graphic design. Yeah.